The old world was buried beneath the sands of time. Yet here I was, standing on the precipice of discovery. My name is Jason Merrick, and I'm an archaeologist with an insatiable curiosity. It was a thirst for knowledge that brought me to the desolate expanse of Elysium Prime, a forgotten human colony. The legends spoke of a queen, a dormant monarch whose powers once shaped the cosmos. Most thought it was a myth, a bedtime story for children. But deep down, I believed. The wind howled around me as I navigated the ancient ruins, my boots crunching against the dust-laden ground. Crumbled edifices towered overhead, remnants of a civilization that had thrived long before my time. Elysium Prime had been a jewel in humanity's crown, a beacon of hope and prosperity. Now, it was just a ghost of its former self, swallowed by time and the relentless march of the universe. As I ventured deeper, the terrain shifted from mere ruins to something more substantial. I unearthed a stone slab covered in intricate carvings, their meanings lost to centuries of neglect. My heart raced. This was no ordinary stone. The carvings depicted a regal figure, adorned in armor that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. I traced my fingers over the engravings, and a jolt of energy coursed through me, igniting a flicker of understanding. "Here lies Lyra, the eternal queen," I murmured, breathless. The air felt charged with an ancient magic, and I knew I had stumbled upon something monumental. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange hue across the ruins, I felt an unsettling presence, a whisper of danger lurking just out of sight. The legends warned of those who sought to harness the queen's power for their own purposes. I could almost hear their echoes, hungry for control over the secrets buried here. Night fell, and I set up camp among the ruins. I examined my findings under the flickering glow of a portable lantern, flipping through my notes, trying to piece together the fragments of history. The story of Queen Lyra was one of strength and sacrifice, a ruler who united humanity against overwhelming odds. But what had happened to her? Where was she now? Sleep was elusive that night, my mind racing with possibilities. Just as I was about to drift into a restless slumber, I was jolted awake by a rumbling beneath the ground. The tremor intensified, and panic surged through me. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest. The ground split apart, and from the depths of the earth, a brilliant light burst forth. I shielded my eyes, stepping back as the ground shook violently. The light expanded, swirling around me, bathing the ruins in an ethereal glow. I felt an irresistible pull, as if the universe itself were calling me closer. And then, as quickly as it began, the rumbling ceased, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. The light coalesced into a figure, a woman, regal and powerful, standing before me. Her long, flowing hair shimmered like molten silver, and her piercing blue eyes seemed to hold the weight of countless lifetimes. She wore armor that gleamed in the moonlight, adorned with symbols I recognized from the carvings. "Who awakens me?" she asked, her voice like a melodic chime, echoing in the stillness of the night. My throat felt dry, and I struggled to find my voice. I am Jason Merrick, a scholar from Earth. I uncovered your tomb, Your Majesty." Her gaze narrowed, and I sensed an ancient intelligence within her. "You are human, yet you do not bear the scars of war. How is this possible?" "I am but a historian," I replied, swallowing my fear. "I sought the truth of our past." "Then you have found me," she said, stepping closer. "I am Lyra, the eternal queen of humanity. I have waited long for this moment. But I sense darkness surrounding us, forces that would use me as a pawn." My heart raced at the implications. "What do you mean? What forces?" She raised a hand, and the air shimmered around us. "The galaxy has changed, Jason. Factions that once feared us now seek to control the legacy of humanity. They will come for me." Before I could respond, a low rumble echoed in the distance, growing louder. My instincts kicked in, and I turned my gaze toward the horizon. Shadows moved between the ruins, creeping closer. "We must move," I urged, my pulse quickening. "We can't stay here." Lyra nodded, her expression resolute. "You are right. We must find safety, but I need your help to navigate this new world. You will be my guide." I felt the weight of her trust, and it ignited a fire within me. Together, we would uncover the truths of the galaxy, and perhaps reclaim humanity's place among the stars. Little did I know that the journey ahead would not only test our resolve, but also unveil secrets that could change everything we thought we knew. As we set off into the night, I could only wonder what awaited us in the depths of the cosmos. The echo of old prophecies lingered in my mind, whispering promises of adventure and danger. The awakening of the Queen was just the beginning. We moved quickly, the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders like an anchor. Lyra, the Queen who had once ruled all of humanity, now walked beside me. Her presence was both inspiring and terrifying. I could feel the sheer power emanating from her raw, untapped energy that seemed to hum in the air around her. As we navigated the labyrinth of ancient ruins, the distant rumble of approaching ships echoed through the night. "Who are they?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder as the shadows closed in. "Zaltharians," she replied, her voice laced with a cold certainty. "They were once our allies, but that was centuries ago. Now, they hunger for power. They seek to control me, to use my knowledge of humanity's ancient technologies. We cannot allow that." My pulse quickened. I had studied the Zaltharians during my years as an academic. They were an advanced species, known for their mastery of manipulation and subterfuge. If they had discovered Lyra's reawakening, we were in serious trouble. I tightened my grip on the small blaster holstered at my side, though I doubted it would do much good against whatever tech they wielded now. We made our way through the crumbled remains of what once must have been a grand hall. Massive pillars lay scattered, worn smooth by time. The moonlight filtered through gaps in the ceiling, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Lyra moved with the grace of a warrior, her keen eyes scanning the horizon. "They'll be here soon," she said, her tone sharp. "We need to find a way off this planet." "I have a ship," I offered, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "It's small, but it's fast. If we can make it back to the dig site, we might be able to—" A deafening explosion cut me off mid-sentence. The ground shook violently, and I was thrown to the ground. Dust filled the air as the ruins collapsed around us. Lyra stood her ground, raising one hand to form a shimmering barrier of light that shielded us from the debris. I stared in awe as the rubble bounced harmlessly off the glowing shield. "They've found us," she said, her expression hardening. "Prepare yourself, Jason. This will not be easy." I scrambled to my feet, drawing my blaster as the first wave of Zaltharian soldiers descended upon us. They moved with an almost inhuman precision, their sleek armor reflecting the moonlight as they advanced. Their weapons crackled with energy, and I could see the faint glow of their tactical visors scanning our every move. "Stay close to me," Lyra commanded. I didn't need to be told twice. As the Zaltharians opened fire, Lyra raised her hand again, and the air between us shimmered with energy. Their shots dissolved into harmless sparks against her barrier, and I watched in amazement as she deflected the barrage with ease. But I knew we couldn't keep this up forever. "There are too many of them," I shouted over the noise, firing a few shots in return. My blaster's bolts barely slowed the advancing soldiers. Lyra glanced at me, her eyes narrowing in thought. "We need to even the odds. Follow my lead." Before I could respond, she moved with lightning speed, charging toward the nearest group of soldiers. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. With a swift motion, Lyra conjured a blade of pure light, slicing through their defenses like they were nothing more than paper. The Zaltharians faltered, clearly unprepared for the force they now faced. I ducked behind a crumbling pillar, taking cover as more soldiers closed in. My shots were more calculated now, aimed at their weak points. I hit one in the leg, sending him sprawling to the ground, but the rest kept coming, relentless. They were not here to negotiate, they wanted Lyra, and they would tear apart anyone who got in their way. Lyra, however, was a force of nature. She danced between them, her energy blade cutting through their ranks with surgical precision. Her movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, and I realized with a jolt that she wasn't just fighting them, she was drawing power from their attacks, feeding off the energy they unleashed. It was as if the Queen was reawakening with each strike, her strength growing with every moment. Despite her prowess, I knew we were outnumbered. For every Zeltharian she cut down, 2 more took their place. Their reinforcements seemed endless. "We can't stay here," I shouted. "They'll overwhelm us." Lyra turned toward me, her eyes blazing. "Lead me to your ship." I nodded, motioning for her to follow as I sprinted through the crumbling ruins. The Zeltharians were hot on our heels, their weapons firing in bursts of energy that lit up the night. I led her through a narrow passageway, ducking and weaving between collapsed structures. My ship wasn't far if we could just make it. An explosion rocked the ground beneath us, sending me sprawling once again. I coughed, struggling to regain my footing as smoke filled the air. My ship lay in ruins, torn apart by a direct hit. The wreckage smoldered in the distance, pieces of it scattered across the ground like broken toys. I stared at the destruction, my heart sinking. "No, no, no, no," I muttered. "That was our only way off this planet." Lyra stood beside me, her expression unreadable. "It seems our enemies have anticipated this." I clenched my fists, frustration boiling over. "Then what do we do now? We're trapped." For a moment, Lyra said nothing, her gaze fixed on the smoldering wreckage. Then, slowly, she turned to me, a steely determination in her eyes. "There is another way," she said softly, "but it is dangerous." I frowned, wiping the dust from my face. "What are you talking about?" "Deep within these ruins lies a gateway, a relic of humanity's past. It is a portal that can take us off this planet, but it has not been used in millennia." "A portal?" I repeated, my mind racing. "That's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "Not for me." I stared at her, torn between disbelief and hope. "Do you know how to activate it?" Lyra nodded. "I was the one who sealed it, long ago. If we can reach it before the Zeltharians, we may have a chance." The idea of using an ancient, long-forgotten portal to escape the planet sounded insane. But what choice did we have? The Zeltharians wouldn't stop until they had her, and I doubted we could hold them off much longer. "Then let's go," I said, determination settling in my gut. "Lead the way." With a nod, Lyra turned and led us deeper into the ruins, toward the heart of the ancient city. The Zeltharians were still closing in, but now we had a goal, a dangerous, desperate plan. As we descended into the depths of the forgotten world, I couldn't help but feel that our real journey was only just beginning. The deeper we ventured into the ruins, the more the air grew thick with an almost oppressive energy. Ancient technology, long dormant, hummed faintly beneath the surface, as if awakening alongside its queen. Lyra led the way, her steps purposeful and sure, while I struggled to keep pace. The labyrinthine passageways twisted and turned, each one darker and more foreboding than the last. "How far is this portal?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the stillness. "Not far," Lyra replied without turning. "We must reach the central chamber. There, we will find the gateway." The weight of the situation pressed down on me. We were being hunted by one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, with no backup and only a half-remembered portal standing between us and certain capture. I could hear the distant sounds of the Zeltharian soldiers moving through the ruins, their methodical sweep inching closer. They weren't in a hurry, they knew we were cornered. As we descended further into the depths of the ruins, I caught glimpses of ancient murals lining the walls. They depicted scenes of humanity's past, massive warships, legions of armored soldiers, and towering figures like Lyra herself, adorned in gleaming armor. The murals told the story of an age long forgotten, a time when humanity had stood at the forefront of the galaxy, feared and respected. "What happened?" I asked, my voice low. "Why did humanity fall? Why are we so scattered now?" Lyra paused in front of one of the murals, her gaze lingering on the images. For a moment, her expression softened, and I saw a glimmer of sadness in her eyes. "We were not defeated," she said quietly. "We chose to retreat. After centuries of war and conquest, we realized that our greatest enemy was not an external force, but ourselves. The Empire fractured under the weight of its own ambition. Those who survived went into hiding, like myself. We believed that, in time, the galaxy would forget us. We were wrong. Her words hung heavy in the air, and I found myself wondering what it must have been like to live through such a time. Humanity had once been the dominant force in the galaxy, and now we were little more than scattered remnants. I had spent my life studying history, but this was something beyond any textbook. Suddenly, Lyra came to an abrupt stop. We had reached a massive stone door, engraved with the same intricate carvings that I had seen on the surface. The portal. My pulse quickened as I took in the sight before me. The door radiated with a faint glow, ancient symbols flickering to life as Lyra approached. "This is it," she said softly, raising her hand toward the door. "The gateway." I stepped closer, watching as her fingers traced the carvings with a practiced ease. The ground beneath us rumbled slightly, and the door began to slide open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Inside, towering pillars of stone and metal rose into the darkness, and at the center of the room, a large circular platform gleamed with a soft, pulsing light. "The gateway hasn't been used in thousands of years," Lyra said as she approached the platform. "But it should still function. The technology of our people was built to last." I followed her, my eyes wide as I took in the sheer scale of the chamber. It felt like stepping into a forgotten part of history, one that had remained untouched for millennia. The Zaltharians would kill to get their hands on her. "How does it work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Lyra knelt beside the platform, her hands moving over the controls with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. "It requires a power source, one tied to my life force. That is how I sealed it, and that is how it must be opened." I watched as she pressed her palm against the platform, her eyes fluttering shut as a soft glow spread from her hand. The ancient machinery stirred to life, the pillars around us lighting up with a golden hue. The platform itself began to hum, the air around us vibrating with the energy it was drawing from Lyra. But before I could ask any more questions, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, armored, and closing fast. "Zaltharians," I hissed, reaching for my blaster. Lyra's eyes snapped open, her expression grim. "They've found us." The first wave of soldiers entered the chamber, their weapons raised. I fired off a few shots, hitting one of them in the chest, but there were too many. They moved with military precision, spreading out to flank us, their energy weapons crackling with lethal intent. "We can't hold them off forever," I shouted, ducking behind one of the pillars for cover. Lyra stood tall, her eyes glowing with a fierce light. "We won't need to." She raised both hands, and the energy in the room surged. The platform beneath her feet glowed brighter, and the air seemed to ripple with power. A blinding flash of light erupted from the center of the chamber, and for a moment I thought the entire structure was going to collapse around us. When the light faded, I blinked, disoriented. The Zaltharians had been thrown back, their soldiers scattered across the chamber floor, groaning in pain. Lyra stood at the center of the chaos, her arms lowered, her expression hard and unforgiving. "The portal is ready," she said, her voice steady. "We leave now." I didn't hesitate. Together, we stepped onto the glowing platform, and I felt the strange sensation of weightlessness wash over me. The world around us seemed to blur, the ancient machinery whirring to life as the portal activated. And then, with a blinding flash, everything shifted. I stumbled as my feet hit solid ground again. The air was different, thinner, colder. I blinked, trying to get my bearings. We had emerged in a new location, far from the ruins of Elysium Prime. The landscape around us was barren, with jagged mountains in the distance and a sky that seemed to shimmer with unfamiliar stars. Lyra glanced around, her expression unreadable. "We're safe. For now." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "Where are we?" "A world known only to a few," she replied. "It is where the remnants of humanity's greatest weapons lie hidden, and it is here that we will make our stand." Her words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just an escape. We were standing at the threshold of something much bigger than either of us had realized. As I looked up at the alien sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that our journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The barren landscape stretched before us, alien and foreboding. A strange wind howled through the jagged mountains in the distance, carrying with it the metallic tang of something long dead. I stood beside Lyra, staring out at the desolate terrain, feeling the weight of the situation settle heavily on my chest. We were far from the galaxy I knew, on a world hidden from time itself. "This is where humanity's greatest weapons are hidden," I asked, trying to suppress the unease gnawing at me. "Yes," Lyra replied, her voice calm but laced with something darker. "Here, in the bowels of this world, lies the key to humanity's resurgence. Weapons powerful enough to reshape the balance of the galaxy." I looked at her, trying to gauge her intentions. "And you trust me enough to bring me here? Why?" Lyra's gaze was steady as she looked out at the horizon. "Because you are not like the others. Your curiosity, your desire to learn rather than conquer, it is rare. Besides, you've already proven yourself. When I awakened, you did not flee. You stood your ground." A strange sense of pride welled up within me, but it was quickly tempered by the reality of our situation. "So, what now? How do we find these weapons?" Lyra gestured toward the mountains. "Beneath those peaks is an ancient fortress, one of the last strongholds of the old empire. It is where we stored our most powerful technologies, but it will not be easy. The fortress is guarded, and the defenses have likely deteriorated over time. We must tread carefully." I nodded, glancing at the blaster still strapped to my side. "Lead the way." As we began our trek across the desolate plains, I couldn't help but think about the Zeltharians. They wouldn't give up so easily. The fact that they had tracked us to Elysium Prime meant they had resources likely far more than we could counter. Even if we made it to this fortress and found the weapons, how could we hope to stand against an entire armada? "You're worried about them," Lyra said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. I glanced at her, caught off guard. "The Zeltharians? Yeah, I am. They won't stop coming after you." "They fear me," she said, her voice distant. "They know what I represent. The reawakening of humanity's power threatens their hold on the galaxy. They will not stop, but neither will we." We walked in silence for a while after that, the wind howling through the empty landscape. My mind was racing, filled with questions. Why had humanity abandoned these weapons? What had driven them to retreat into the shadows? And what role did Lyra play in all of this? As we approached the base of the mountains, the terrain became more treacherous. Jagged rocks jutted out of the ground, and the air grew colder. It was as if the very planet itself was warning us to turn back. Lyra paused at the entrance to a narrow ravine. "Through here," she said, gesturing for me to follow. We squeezed through the tight passage, the walls closing in around us as we made our way deeper into the mountains. The darkness grew thicker, and the temperature continued to drop. I could see my breath now, each exhale forming a thin cloud in the freezing air. Finally, after what felt like hours of climbing and navigating the labyrinthine passageways, we emerged into a vast cavern. My jaw dropped as I took in the sight before me. The fortress, an enormous structure of black stone and gleaming metal, rose up from the center of the cavern, its walls adorned with strange symbols that pulsed faintly with energy. "This is it," Lyra said softly, "the last fortress of the Empire." The fortress was massive, its walls towering above us, and I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me. I had spent years studying ruins, artifacts, and long-forgotten relics, but nothing had ever prepared me for this. It was awe-inspiring and terrifying. Lyra stepped forward, her hand brushing against one of the symbols carved into the stone. As her fingers made contact, the symbol flared to life, sending a ripple of energy through the air. The ground beneath us trembled slightly, and I could hear the faint hum of ancient machinery coming to life. "The defenses are still active," she said, her voice tense. "We need to move quickly." I followed her into the fortress, my heart pounding in my chest. The interior was just as grand as the exterior, with wide corridors lined with the same glowing symbols. Everything was pristine, as if time had barely touched this place. But there was an eerie stillness to it, like a tomb that had been undisturbed for centuries. As we ventured deeper into the fortress, I noticed strange markings on the wall, scars from some long-ago battle. The deeper we went, the more the air seemed to hum with an ominous energy. "Are we alone here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's expression darkened. "The defenses will not allow us to be alone for long." Almost as if on cue, the ground beneath us rumbled, and I heard the unmistakable sound of metal grinding against metal. Lyra's eyes flashed with alarm, and before I could react, the walls around us began to shift. Panels slid open, revealing rows of dormant machines, ancient sentinels, their eyes glowing a deep red as they powered up. "We need to move," Lyra said sharply, drawing her energy blade. The sentinels' massive, humanoid constructs stepped forward, their metal limbs creaking as they advanced. Their weapons were unlike anything I had ever seen, sleek, with glowing energy cores that pulsed menacingly. There was no time to think, no time to process. I fired my blaster at the nearest one, but the shot barely dented its armor. "These are Imperial Guardians," Lyra said, cutting down one of the sentinels with a swift strike of her blade. "They will not stop until we reach the core. Stay close to me." I did as she said, firing off shots to cover her as she expertly dismantled the machines. But for every one we took down, more emerged from the walls. It was as if the fortress itself was coming alive, determined to stop us from reaching whatever lay at its heart. We pushed forward, the sound of metal clashing against metal echoing through the halls. My blaster was nearly depleted, and I could feel my energy waning. But Lyra never faltered. She fought with a fury I hadn't seen before, her movements precise and lethal. It was as if she had been born for this, born to fight against the very machines that had once served her empire. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a massive door at the end of the corridor. Lyra placed her hand against the control panel, and the door slid open with a hiss. Beyond it lay the core of the fortress, a vast chamber filled with consoles and machinery, all centered around a single, towering device. "The central control," Lyra said, breathing heavily. "This is where we can activate the weapons." I glanced around the room, my heart still racing from the fight. But what kind of weapons are we talking about? What are we actually trying to do here? Lyra stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the towering machine. "The Empire created these weapons to protect humanity from extinction, but they were never meant to be used lightly. If we activate them, there will be no turning back. The galaxy will tremble at our power once again." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. This was it. This was what the Zaltharians had feared, the return of humanity's ancient might. But as I looked at the control console, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing with something far more dangerous than we realized. Something that could change everything, for better or worse. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lyra turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "There is no other choice. The galaxy will come for us, Jason. And when it does, we must be ready." She reached out and placed her hand on the control panel. And with that, the fortress came alive. The fortress pulsed with life as Lyra's hand pressed firmly against the control panel. A low, reverberating hum filled the chamber, and the ancient technology began to stir, its circuits crackling to life after centuries of dormancy. The central core, a massive, crystalline structure, flared with light, casting long shadows across the metallic walls. I stood back, watching in awe and apprehension as the fortress awakened. The energy in the air was palpable, a deep thrumming that resonated in my bones. Whatever we had just set into motion, it was far beyond anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't just a relic of humanity's past, it was a living monument to the power we had once wielded. And now, that power was coming back to life. Lyra's face was light by the glow of the core, her expression one of grim determination. For a brief moment, I saw the weight of centuries in her eyes, an ancient burden that she had carried, now ready to be unleashed. I need you to secure the perimeter, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the hum of the machinery. The Zaltharians won't be far behind. If they breach this chamber, we're finished. I nodded, gripping my blaster tightly. Got it. Without another word, I made my way back toward the entrance of the chamber, my mind racing. The Zaltharians had already proven relentless in their pursuit of Lyra. With the fortress now active, it wouldn't take long for them to detect the surge in energy. They would come, and when they did, it wouldn't just be a skirmish, it would be a full-scale assault. As I reached the corridor leading out of the core room, a familiar crackling sound filled the air. My heart sank. The Zaltharians were already here. I ducked behind a large support pillar just as a squad of Zaltharian soldiers entered the fortress. Their sleek, silver armor reflected the dim light of the corridors, and they moved with deadly precision, their rifles trained on the passage ahead. I took a deep breath, steadying my aim. I couldn't let them reach Lyra, not while she was trying to activate whatever ancient weaponry this fortress held. I fired, taking out the first Zaltharian before he even had a chance to react. The blast echoed through the corridor, and chaos erupted as the rest of the squad scattered, returning fire in quick bursts. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and ozone as blaster fire lit up the darkened corridor. I kept low, using the cover of the pillars to my advantage, picking off the soldiers one by one. But they were fast, and their armor was far more advanced than anything I had ever encountered. Each shot I landed was a struggle, and my energy cells were depleting faster than I could afford. From the corner of my eye, I saw one of the Zaltharians pull out a cylindrical device, some kind of grenade. Before I could react, he hurled it toward the entrance of the core room. "Lyra!" I shouted, diving for cover as the device exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave slammed into me, sending me sprawling across the floor. My ears rang, and for a moment, everything was a blur of light and sound. I struggled to my feet, my vision swimming as I scanned the corridor. The Zaltharians were advancing again, this time more cautiously, their weapons trained on the doorway to the core room. I couldn't let them get through. With gritted teeth, I fired off another round of shots, keeping the soldiers at bay as best as I could. But it wasn't enough. There were too many of them, and I was running out of time. Suddenly, the fortress itself seemed to react. The walls pulsed with energy, and the air around me grew heavy with static. Before I could fully comprehend what was happening, the very structure of the corridor began to shift. Massive slabs of metal slid into place, sealing off the passageways and trapping the remaining Zaltharians in a maze of shifting walls. I stumbled back, watching in disbelief as the fortress itself fought back against the invaders. The Zaltharians, now cut off and disoriented, fired wildly in all directions, their disciplined formation falling apart as they tried to navigate the ever-changing corridors. Lyra had warned me that the defenses would be active, but I hadn't expected anything like this. The fortress wasn't just a passive relic, it was a sentient weapon, programmed to protect itself and its inhabitants. For now, it seemed to recognize us as allies, but that didn't mean we were safe. I hurried back to the core room, my pulse racing. "Lyra, the Zaltharians!" "They won't get far," she said, her voice steady as she manipulated the controls. "The fortress will deal with them." I hesitated, glancing back toward the shifting corridors. "How can you be so sure?" Lyra didn't look up. "This place was designed to withstand invasions far more advanced than what the Zaltharians can muster. But that doesn't mean we have time. The activation sequence is nearly complete, but there's one final piece that we need to unlock the full potential of the weapons." I frowned. "What piece?" "The interface crystal," she replied, stepping away from the console and motioning for me to follow. "It's stored deeper within the fortress, in a vault that only a member of the royal bloodline can access." My stomach dropped. "Wait, you mean you?" She nodded. "Yes, but I'll need your help to get there. The vault is heavily guarded, and I won't be able to access it alone." I glanced down at my depleted blaster, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "So, what happens if we get this crystal?" Lyra's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. If we succeed, humanity will have a weapon that could shift the balance of the galaxy in our favor. But it's not without risks. This power could just as easily destroy us if we're not careful. I swallowed hard, the gravity of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about defeating the Zaltharians anymore. This was about the future of humanity itself, and whether or not we were ready to wield the power that had been hidden away for so long. "All right," I said, steeling myself. "Let's get that crystal." We moved quickly through the fortress, the walls still shifting around us in a constant state of flux. I kept my blaster at the ready, but for the moment, the Zaltharians were no longer our immediate concern. The fortress seemed to have contained them, at least for now. As we descended deeper into the bowels of the structure, the air grew colder, and the sense of foreboding intensified. The corridors were darker here, the glowing symbols on the walls growing fainter as we approached the vault. It was as if the fortress itself was warning us to turn back. Lyra stopped in front of a massive door, its surface etched with intricate patterns and runes. She placed her hand against it, and a soft glow emanated from the door in response. "This is it," she said quietly, "the vault of the royal family." The door slid open with a low rumble, revealing a chamber bathed in soft, golden light. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and atop it sat a crystal unlike anything I had ever seen. It pulsed with a faint inner glow, its surface shifting and refracting the light in ways that seemed almost unnatural. Lyra stepped forward, her hand hovering over the crystal. "Once I take this, the fortress will be fully activated. There's no going back after this." I watched her carefully, my heart pounding in my chest. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I've been waiting for this moment for centuries. It's time for humanity to rise again." With that, she reached out and grasped the crystal. The fortress shuddered, and a wave of energy surged through the air, nearly knocking me off my feet. The symbols on the walls flared to life, brighter than ever before, and the very ground beneath us seemed to hum with power. But then, something changed. The light in the room flickered, and the energy that had been so carefully contained within the fortress began to spiral out of control. The walls groaned, and a low, ominous rumble echoed through the chamber. Lyra's eyes widened as she clutched the crystal. "Something's wrong." And in that moment, I realized that we weren't just dealing with ancient technology. We had awoken something far more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. The walls of the chamber vibrated with an unsettling resonance as the vault door slid shut behind us. I could feel the floor trembling beneath my feet, an ominous sign that whatever we had triggered wasn't behaving as expected. Lyra still stood at the center of the room, clutching the crystalline interface tightly, her face pale with shock. For a brief moment, the ancient fortress itself seemed to hold its breath, as if it were waiting to see what would happen next. "What the hell is happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as the low rumble grew louder. Lyra shook her head, her grip tightening on the crystal. "I don't know. This shouldn't be happening. The fortress is supposed to respond to the crystal's activation, but—" She trailed off, her eyes darting around the room. "It's like something else has woken up." Before I could respond, a sharp, piercing sound erupted from the walls. It was like metal being torn apart, a high-pitched shriek that set my teeth on edge. The entire room lurched, and the floor beneath us shifted violently, sending me staggering into the nearest wall for support. "Brace yourself," Lyra shouted over the deafening noise, her voice filled with a rare note of panic. I barely had time to react before the fortress was plunged into chaos. The lights in the chamber flickered wildly, casting strange, disjointed shadows on the walls. The hum of the ancient machinery, once steady and rhythmic, had turned into a discordant cacophony of whirring gears and grinding metal. The entire structure was coming apart at the seams, and we were right in the middle of it. I reached for my blaster instinctively, even though I knew it would be useless against whatever was happening. "Lyra, what do we do?" She didn't answer immediately. Her focus was entirely on the crystal in her hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was as if she were trying to wrest control of the fortress through sheer will alone. But whatever power she was attempting to harness wasn't cooperating. "It's fighting me," she finally said, her voice strained. "The fortress isn't responding like it should. Something." She never got the chance to finish her sentence. A massive explosion rocked the fortress, throwing both of us to the ground. I felt the heat of the blast wash over me, the shockwave rattling my bones. When I looked up, the ceiling of the chamber was cracking open, chunks of debris raining down around us. "We need to move," I shouted, scrambling to my feet. Lyra was already on her way to the door, the crystal still glowing faintly in her grasp. "We need to reach the central control chamber," she said, her voice urgent. "If we can get there, I might be able to override whatever's happening and stabilize the fortress." I nodded, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Lead the way." We raced through the collapsing corridors, the walls shifting and groaning around us. The fortress was in complete disarray, its once impenetrable defenses now malfunctioning and turning against themselves. I caught glimpses of massive, mechanical constructs slamming into walls, their circuits sparking as they malfunctioned. Automated turrets sputtered and fired erratically at nothing, their targeting systems clearly fried. And then there were the Zaltharians. We hadn't seen them since the vault door had closed behind us, but now they were everywhere. The fortress had trapped them in its labyrinth of shifting corridors, but they were fighting their way through. Squads of heavily armed Zaltharian soldiers were trying to breach deeper into the fortress, their sleek armor scorched from the fortress's malfunctioning defenses. We turned a corner just in time to see a Zaltharian patrol ahead, their weapons raised. They spotted us instantly, and the air filled with the sound of blaster fire. "Down," I shouted, diving behind a half-collapsed wall as bolts of plasma streaked past my head. Lyra slid beside me, her back pressed against the wall. She was breathing hard, her face slick with sweat. "We can't keep fighting them off," she said, her voice tight. "We need to reach the control chamber before this entire place falls apart." I fired blindly over the wall, forcing the Zaltharians to take cover behind the remains of a shattered column. "How far is it?" "2 more levels down," she replied, glancing at a small holographic display on her wrist. "We'll need to take one of the transport tubes." I peeked over the wall again, quickly assessing the situation. The Zaltharians had regrouped, and they were advancing cautiously, their weapons trained on us. We were pinned down, and there was no way we were getting to the transport tubes without a fight. "Cover me," I said, bracing myself for what I was about to do. Lyra gave me a sharp look. "Are you insane?" "Just do it," I snapped. Without waiting for her to argue, I vaulted over the wall, my blaster firing in rapid succession as I sprinted toward the Zaltharians. They weren't expecting such a reckless move, and for a brief moment, they hesitated just long enough for me to close the distance. I dropped to the ground, sliding under a barrage of plasma fire as I unleashed a volley of shots at their feet. 2 of the Zaltharians went down, their armor sparking as they crumpled to the floor. The others scrambled for cover, but I was already on top of them. I slammed the butt of my blaster into the faceplate of the nearest soldier, sending him crashing into the wall. His helmet shattered on impact, and I didn't give him a chance to recover. A swift kick to the chest sent him sprawling, his weapon clattering to the floor. Behind me, Lyra had emerged from cover, firing precise shots at the remaining Zaltharians. She moved with an almost preternatural grace, her aim deadly. Within seconds, the remaining soldiers were down, their bodies littering the corridor. "That was reckless," she said, her voice tight as she approached me. I shrugged, wiping sweat from my brow. "It worked, didn't it?" Lyra shook her head, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "Come on, we're almost there." We moved quickly, making our way to one of the transport tubes. The entrance was partially blocked by debris, but we managed to clear it just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the tube was a cylindrical chamber lined with what looked like ancient magnetic rails, designed to carry people between levels at incredible speeds. Lyra stepped onto the platform at the center of the tube and activated the controls. The entire chamber hummed to life, and within moments, we were rocketing downward, the walls of the tube blurring as we descended deeper into the heart of the fortress. As we sped toward the control chamber, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The fortress was falling apart around us, and if Lyra couldn't stabilize it soon, it wouldn't matter if we stopped the Zeltharians. We would be buried alive in this ancient tomb. Finally, the transport tube came to a stop, and the doors slid open with a hiss. We stepped out into a massive, domed chamber, its ceiling soaring high above us. At the center of the room was a large, circular console, surrounded by glowing holographic displays. "This is it," Lyra said, moving quickly toward the console. "The central control nexus. If I can interface with the system here, I should be able to take control of the fortress and stop the destruction." I watched as she began working, her fingers flying across the holographic controls. The chamber hummed with energy, and I could see the fortress's systems beginning to respond, stabilizing slowly but surely. But then, something caught my eye. In the far corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. A Zeltharian. He was standing perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Lyra, and in his hand, he held a detonator. "Lyra," I shouted, raising my blaster. But it was too late. The Zeltharian pressed the button. The chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light. The blast knocked the wind out of me, hurling me against the cold, metallic floor. My vision blurred as the force of the explosion rattled every bone in my body. The shockwave reverberated through the chamber, filling my ears with a deafening roar. I struggled to get up, my limbs heavy and sluggish, but the ringing in my head was overwhelming. For a few seconds, I could only make out shadows and flickering lights, like watching the world through a broken lens. Then reality snapped back into focus. "Lyra," I shouted, my voice hoarse as I fought to regain my senses. I scanned the chamber, blinking away the haze. Through the smoke and debris, I spotted her crumpled form near the console. She wasn't moving. Ignoring the burning pain in my side, I crawled toward her, dragging myself across the shattered floor. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of burning circuitry, but I kept moving. When I reached her, I rolled her onto her back, my heart pounding in my chest. Her face was pale, streaked with ash and blood, but she was breathing. A shallow, ragged breath, but breathing nonetheless. "Lyra," I said, shaking her gently. "Lyra, wake up." Her eyelids fluttered, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she might not wake up at all. But then she coughed, a weak, painful sound, and her eyes slowly opened. What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I glanced back toward the source of the explosion. The Zeltharian was gone, reduced to little more than a smoldering heap. But the damage had been done. The console was in ruins, its delicate machinery scorched and twisted beyond recognition. "He set off a detonator," I said grimly. "The control chamber's wrecked." Lyra groaned, struggling to sit up. No, we were so close." I helped her to her feet, though she could barely stand. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice urgent. "The fortress is going down fast. We won't survive another explosion like that." But Lyra shook her head, a stubborn glint in her eyes. "No, we're not leaving. Not yet." She limped toward the console, her hands shaking as she surveyed the damage. "There's still a way, there has to be." "Lyra," I began, but she cut me off. "The fortress has an emergency failsafe," she said, her voice growing stronger. "If I can access it, I can still stabilize the core. But it'll be risky, there's no telling how much damage the explosion caused." I stared at her, disbelief warring with the urgency of our situation. The entire structure was falling apart around us, and she wanted to take another gamble. "We don't have time for this," I snapped, but she didn't even look at me. "I'm not leaving this place to collapse," she muttered, her fingers dancing over the wreckage of the console. "If this fortress falls, the power it contains could rip a hole through half this sector. We're sitting on a bomb, and it's ticking down fast." A cold chill ran through me at her words. I'd known this place was dangerous, but I hadn't realized just how catastrophic its destruction could be. If Lyra was right, and I had no reason to doubt her, then we weren't just fighting to survive. We were trying to stop a disaster that could take out entire systems. "Fine," I said, my voice tight. "But if we're doing this, we need to do it fast." She nodded, her eyes flicking up to meet mine for the first time since the explosion. "I'll need your help. The console's too damaged for me to work it alone." Together, we worked as quickly as we could, piecing together what remained of the interface. It was a mess, wires tangled and fuses blown, half the display screen shattered, but there was enough left that Lyra could make sense of it. "The failsafe's buried deep," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's part of the fortress's core systems. I need to access it directly, but I'll have to bypass several security layers first." As she worked, I kept an eye on the chamber around us. The fortress was still groaning, its structure straining under the damage it had taken. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, a steady pulse that seemed to grow more erratic with each passing minute. "How much longer?" I asked, my eyes flicking nervously toward the ceiling, which had already begun to crack under the pressure. "Almost there," Lyra replied, her hands flying over the damaged controls. "Just a little more." Suddenly, a soft chime echoed through the chamber, and the lights dimmed briefly before stabilizing. Lyra exhaled in relief. "I've got it," she said, a hint of triumph in her voice. "The failsafe's online." I barely had time to process her words before the entire fortress shuddered violently, the floor beneath us buckling as the machinery groaned in protest. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my heart racing. Lyra's face paled. "The core is destabilizing faster than I thought. We need to activate the failsafe now." Without another word, she entered the final sequence into the console. The room filled with a deep, resonant hum, and I could feel the fortress responding, its systems attempting to realign themselves. For a moment, I thought we'd done it. The vibrations in the floor began to steady, and the walls stopped creaking ominously. But then the ground beneath us lurched violently, throwing us both off our feet. A blaring alarm filled the chamber, and red lights flashed along the walls. "What's happening?" I shouted, pulling myself to my feet. Lyra looked stricken. "The failsafe, it's not enough. The damage is too severe. The core is going to blow." The blood drained from my face. "What do we do?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the far side of the chamber. "There's one more option," she said quietly, "but it's a long shot." I followed her gaze and saw what she was looking at: a small, heavily reinforced door set into the wall, partially hidden by debris. It was the entrance to the core itself. "We can manually stabilize the core," she said, her voice low. "But it's dangerous. If we fail—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. I looked at her, then at the door, then back to her. My mind raced, weighing the odds, but in the end, there was only one choice. "Let's do it," I said. Together, we made our way to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Lyra keyed in a sequence on a nearby panel, and the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a narrow corridor that led to the core chamber. The heat hit us immediately, a stifling wave that made it hard to breathe. The air inside the core was thick with the smell of burning metal, and the walls were lined with conduits that sparked and flickered as the fortress's systems struggled to keep up. At the center of the room, suspended in a massive containment field, was the core itself, a glowing sphere of energy, pulsing with barely contained power. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. "We need to recalibrate the containment field," Lyra said, her voice tense. "But it's tricky. One wrong move, and we'll lose control completely." I nodded, trying to keep my hands steady as we approached the core. The heat was unbearable, and I could feel sweat dripping down my face, but I forced myself to focus. Lyra worked quickly, her fingers dancing over the control panel near the containment field. I did my best to assist, following her instructions as we tried to stabilize the core. But the fortress was fighting us every step of the way. Every time we made progress, something else would fail, sending us scrambling to fix it. "We're running out of time," I muttered, glancing at the containment field, which was flickering ominously. "I know," Lyra replied, her voice tight with concentration. Suddenly, the core flared, sending a shock wave through the chamber. I was thrown back, hitting the wall hard enough to knock the wind out of me. When I looked up, Lyra was standing directly in front of the core, her eyes wide with horror. "It's overloading," she whispered. The containment field collapsed. The core surged. A wave of blinding light and raw energy burst from its center, flooding the chamber in a white-hot inferno. My instincts screamed at me to run, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The walls trembled violently, and it felt like the whole fortress was about to be torn apart at the seams. Lyra was closest to the core, too close. My heart clenched as I saw her standing there, her face lit by the violent light of the overloading energy. For a moment, she was frozen, mesmerized by the core's fury. I scrambled to my feet, shouting her name, but my voice was lost in the deafening roar of the fortress's death throes. I ran toward her, each step feeling like an eternity. Time seemed to slow, the heat warping the air between us. The core's containment had collapsed, and I could see it pure, untethered energy spilling out like a ruptured star. The power was so intense it felt like gravity itself was bending around it. "Lyra!" I shouted again, lunging toward her just as the core pulsed with another surge of energy. This time it wasn't just light. It was a wave of force that slammed into me, throwing me back across the chamber. I hit the ground hard, gasping for breath, my vision swimming. But then something happened, something I didn't understand at first. The core's wild surge of energy hit an invisible barrier, something that shimmered faintly in the air. The power rippled against it, pushed outward, but it didn't escape. The core's destructive fury was being contained. I blinked through the haze of heat and pain, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. It was Lyra. She was standing in front of the core, her arms outstretched, and around her was a shimmering field of energy, a force that was holding back the explosion. But it wasn't technology. This wasn't some failsafe built into the fortress. It was something else entirely. I could feel it, even from where I lay, the hum of energy, the strange, otherworldly pulse that radiated from Lyra. This wasn't her using the fortress's systems to stop the core from overloading. No, this was something far more primal, far more powerful. The realization hit me like a hammer. Lyra wasn't just a scientist, wasn't just a survivor fighting to save herself and the galaxy. There was something more to her, something ancient, something terrifyingly potent. I staggered to my feet, my body protesting every movement, but I couldn't look away from her. The energy field around her was pulsating, growing stronger with each second, and the core, the very heart of the fortress, was bending to her will. The sphere of unstable energy was shrinking, compressing, as if it were being forced back into submission. "Lyra!" I shouted again, but this time it wasn't out of panic. It was out of awe. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting mine. For a brief moment, I saw something in those eyes, something vast and unknowable, a depth of power and history that went beyond anything I could comprehend. It was like looking into the heart of a star, ancient and unfathomable. But then her gaze softened, and the Lyra I knew returned. The shimmer of power around her flickered, and with a final, determined push, she forced the core back into its containment. The violent energy that had been threatening to consume the fortress collapsed inward, folding in on itself until it was no more than a flicker, a faint pulse of light inside the reinforced containment field. The chamber fell silent. The alarms had stopped, the tremors ceased. All that remained was the steady hum of the stabilized core. I stood there, staring at her, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Lyra lowered her arms slowly, her body sagging with exhaustion. She stumbled, and I rushed forward to catch her before she fell. What did you do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me, her face pale and drawn, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "I told you I wasn't going to let this place destroy us." I shook my head, trying to process it all. That wasn't the fortress's failsafe. That was you." She didn't deny it. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, leaning heavily on me for support. "There's a lot you don't know, Marcus. A lot no one knows. But now's not the time to explain." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but I could see how drained she was. Whatever she had done had taken everything out of her, and now was definitely not the time for questions. "We need to leave," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The core's stable, but this place, it's still falling apart. We don't have much time." I nodded, helping her to her feet. "Let's get out of here." Together, we made our way back through the wreckage of the control chamber, moving as fast as Lyra's weakened state would allow. The fortress was still groaning and creaking, the damage too extensive to fully repair, but at least the imminent threat of a catastrophic explosion had been averted. As we reached the corridor leading back to the hangar, the enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. Lyra wasn't just anyone. She wasn't just another survivor or brilliant scientist. She was something far more than that, something tied to the ancient power that had been dormant for so long. And now, that power was awake. When we reached the hangar, I could see the remaining ships still docked. The others, those who had managed to survive the chaos, were already scrambling to get aboard, desperate to escape the crumbling fortress. "Marcus," a voice called out. It was Ortega, waving us over from one of the remaining vessels. His face was a mixture of relief and exhaustion as he saw us. "Are you two all right?" he asked as we approached. I glanced at Lyra, who was leaning heavily against me, her face pale and sweat-soaked, but alive. "We're fine," I said, though that was far from the truth. Ortega's gaze lingered on Lyra for a moment, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face, but he didn't say anything. He knew better than to ask questions now. There would be time for that later if we made it out of here. "Let's move," Ortega said, motioning toward the ship. "This place is coming down fast." We hurried aboard, the sound of the fortress's final death throes echoing behind us as we sealed the hatch. I could feel the engines of the ship hum to life beneath my feet, the vibrations reassuring in the chaos. As the ship lifted off, I looked out the viewport, watching as the fortress began to crumble in earnest. Massive sections of the structure were breaking away, collapsing into the void of space. The once imposing citadel was now little more than a ruin, its power diminished, its legacy shattered. But even as I watched it fall, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Whatever had been awakened in that fortress, it was still with us, and it wasn't going to rest. I glanced at Lyra, who had slumped into a seat, her eyes closed as she tried to regain her strength. She looked fragile, vulnerable, but I knew now that beneath that exterior was something far more powerful than I could have ever imagined. "What are you, Lyra?" I whispered, more to myself than to her. But I had a feeling I was going to find out soon enough. The escape ship broke free of the fortress's gravitational pull, and the ruined citadel shrank behind us, disappearing into the vast, star-studded expanse. The silence in the cabin was thick, everyone too exhausted and rattled to speak. But even as the fortress faded from view, I couldn't shake the weight of what had happened back there. Not just the destruction of the stronghold, but the deeper, stranger truth that had been revealed. Lyra wasn't just another human survivor, she was something else, something that defied understanding. But as I looked at her now, sitting quietly across the small cabin with her eyes closed, the question of what exactly she was remained unanswered, and I had a gut feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. Ortega broke the silence. "We need to debrief when we get back. Whatever just happened down there wasn't standard protocol." I looked up at him. "You think?" Ortega's expression was grim. "I know we're not the only ones who survived this, and I'm willing to bet that those who did are going to want answers. Fast." Lyra stirred at his words, opening her eyes. "They won't find the answers they're looking for. Not now, not in what remains of the fortress." "And what about you?" Ortega pressed. "You seem to know exactly what you were doing back there. You kept that core from blowing us all to hell." Her gaze drifted to the viewport, staring out at the endless void. I didn't control the core. I only delayed it. It was a temporary fix. The room fell silent again, Ortega's expression darkening as he tried to process her words. Delayed. Not prevented. That meant the danger hadn't passed. I cleared my throat. So, what now? You're saying it's still out there? Whatever that energy was. Lyra finally looked at me, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes clear. Yes, what we encountered back there is only the beginning. The core we saw, it's one of many. They're remnants of something ancient, something buried deep within the fabric of this galaxy. And now that it's been disturbed, the rest will start waking up. Waking up? Ortega's voice was sharp, suspicious. What are you saying? Lyra sighed. The fortress wasn't just a relic of some forgotten war. It was a containment facility built to keep something far worse locked away. When we disturbed it, we triggered a chain reaction. I felt the cold pit of dread settle in my stomach. Chain reaction? You mean more of those cores are going to explode? Not explode, Lyra corrected, her voice soft but firm. Awaken. And when they do, they'll reshape everything in their path. The weight of her words hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a rogue fortress or an ancient technology gone haywire. This was something far bigger, something galaxy-shaking. And what's the end game here? Ortega asked, his voice quiet but intense. What happens when these cores finish waking up? What do they do? Lyra met his gaze, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw real fear in her eyes. They reshape reality, and if they wake fully, nothing will be able to stop them. Ortega clenched his jaw, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm as if it could protect him from the magnitude of what she was saying. That's why you were able to control it, wasn't it? You're tied to them somehow. You've been hiding something this whole time. Lyra looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment. Then she took a deep breath, her voice barely audible when she spoke. I didn't know for sure, not until today. But yes, I'm connected to them, to the power they hold. And what does that make you? I asked quietly, my mind racing with the implications. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out the viewport again, as if searching for something beyond the stars. I was born human, she said softly. But after what happened, I'm not entirely sure I still am. Ortega snorted in disbelief. That's an understatement. I couldn't blame him. I was still struggling to wrap my head around it myself. The woman we had been fighting alongside, the brilliant mind who had outmaneuvered every obstacle thrown at us, was no longer fully human. She was something else, something that defied explanation. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lyra closed her eyes. I don't know, but I can feel them, waking. It's like a pressure at the back of my mind, a pulse that's getting stronger with every hour. We have to find a way to stop them, or this galaxy is going to tear itself apart. How do we do that? Ortega demanded, his frustration boiling over. You just said they're unstoppable once they wake up. I didn't say unstoppable, Lyra corrected. I said nothing can stop them if they fully awaken. Right now, they're still vulnerable, still gathering strength. But there's not much time. Once they reach their full potential, it'll be too late. So we stop them before that happens, I said, trying to force hope into my voice, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We find the other cores, destroy them, contain them, whatever it takes. Lyra shook her head. It's not that simple. These aren't just machines or weapons. They're part of something older, something woven into the fabric of reality itself. Destroying them could have catastrophic consequences. Catastrophic how? Ortega asked, his voice tight. Imagine pulling a thread from a tapestry, she explained. The whole thing could unravel. I felt a chill run down my spine. So what do we do? She didn't answer right away, and I realized she didn't know. She had all this power, this connection to something ancient and terrifying, but even she didn't have all the answers. We need more information, she finally said. There are places hidden archives, old records that might hold clues. Places that were sealed away after the last war, when the galaxy first encountered these cores. Ortega sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Great, so we're chasing ghosts and rumors across the galaxy. It's the only chance we have, Lyra said, her voice firm. And we have to move quickly. Once the cores fully wake, it won't matter how much information we gather, it'll be too late. Where do we start? I asked, trying to focus on the immediate task instead of the overwhelming reality we were facing. There's a station on the edge of the outer rim, Lyra said. It was abandoned centuries ago, but I've heard rumors that it holds the key to understanding these cores. If we can reach it before the rest of the galaxy figures out what's happening. Her words trailed off, but the implication was clear. We were running out of time, and we were the only ones who could stop this. Ortega nodded grimly. Fine. We'll go to this station. But after that, I want answers, Lyra. Real answers. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. You'll have them. As the ship sped toward the distant stars, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading into something far darker than any of us were prepared for. The cores were waking, and with them, a power that could reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. And the woman sitting across from me, the one I thought I knew, was at the center of it all. But what scared me the most was the gnawing suspicion that even she didn't fully understand the forces she was connected to. And if she couldn't stop them, who could? The station Lyra had mentioned was a forgotten relic, hidden on the edge of the outer rim where few dared to venture. As we approached, it came into view massive, decaying, its surface pockmarked with the scars of time and neglect. Abandoned centuries ago, it floated like a derelict sentinel in the cold vacuum, an eerie reminder of a bygone era. This is it, Lyra said quietly, her eyes fixed on the station as the ship closed in. This is where we'll find the answers we need. Ortega glanced at me, his expression skeptical. You sure about that? Looks like a graveyard to me. It's not what it seems, Lyra replied, her voice calm but firm. There's something here, something buried beneath the surface. We have to find it before the others do. By the others, she meant the growing number of factions and warlords that had taken notice of the disturbance. The cores had already started waking up across the galaxy, and chaos was spreading like wildfire. Governments were scrambling to contain the sudden outbreaks of reality-warping phenomena, but their efforts were disjointed, reactionary. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. Lyra, though, seemed to know exactly what was at stake, or at least, she pretended to. We docked at the station's outer bay, the metallic clang of the ship's landing gear echoing through the hull. The airlock hissed open, and a wave of stale, cold air greeted us. The station was dead, no lights, no power, just the silent, oppressive weight of emptiness. As we stepped inside, our boots clanging against the metal floor, the sense of foreboding grew stronger. It was as if the station itself was watching us, waiting for something. This place gives me the creeps, Ortega muttered, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. Stay close, I said, scanning the dim corridor ahead. We don't know what we're walking into. Lyra led the way, moving with purpose through the shadowed halls. Despite the station's dilapidated state, she seemed to know exactly where she was going, her steps sure and unhesitating. Ortega and I exchanged a glance, both of us aware that something about this place and Lyra didn't add up. We descended deeper into the station, the corridors becoming narrower, more claustrophobic. The air grew colder, and I could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on us. Finally, we reached what appeared to be a control room, or what was left of one. Broken consoles and shattered screens littered the floor, and the walls were scarred with burn marks and deep gashes. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't ended peacefully. Lyra approached one of the consoles, wiping away the dust with her hand. It's here, she murmured. This is where they hid the archive. Ortega raised an eyebrow. Hid? You mean there's something buried in this mess? Lyra didn't answer directly. Instead, she knelt down and pressed her hand to a small, seemingly insignificant panel on the floor. A soft hum filled the air, and the floor beneath us began to shift, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, intricately designed device, something ancient and unmistakably alien. "What is that?" I asked, my pulse quickening. Lyra carefully lifted the device, holding it up to the dim light. "This," she said softly, "is the key. It holds the data we need to understand the cores." Ortega frowned. "And how exactly do you know that?" Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Because I was meant to find it. This station, this device, it was all part of a plan that was set in motion long before any of us were born. The cores, the war, everything, it's all connected." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of plan are we talking about?" Lyra stood, holding the device tightly in her hands. "A plan to reshape the galaxy, to restore balance, in a way no one understands yet." Ortega's hand moved to his sidearm again, his suspicion evident. "Restore balance, or destroy everything?" Before Lyra could respond, a deep rumble shook the station, and the floor beneath us trembled. I instinctively reached for my weapon, my heart pounding. Something was happening, something big. "The cores are accelerating," Lyra said, her voice urgent. "We don't have much time. We need to get this data back to the ship." But before we could move, the walls around us began to shift and groan, as if the station itself was coming alive. A low, mechanical hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "Move!" I shouted, grabbing Lyra's arm and pulling her toward the exit. We sprinted down the corridor, the station shaking violently as we ran. Debris fell from the ceiling, and the floor buckled beneath our feet. Whatever was happening, it was tearing the station apart. We reached the airlock just as a massive explosion rocked the lower levels. The ship's engines roared to life as we scrambled aboard, the hatch sealing behind us. Ortega punched the controls, and we blasted away from the station, narrowly avoiding the debris that was now flying in all directions. From the viewport, I watched as the station collapsed in on itself, consumed by fire and destruction. The archive, the key to stopping the cores, was gone. Lyra sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the device in her hands. It was the only thing we had salvaged from the station, and whatever secrets it held were now our only hope. "What now?" Ortega asked, his voice tense. Lyra looked up at him, her expression grim but determined. "Now we decode this, and we stop the cores before it's too late." "And if we can't?" I asked quietly. She met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "We have to. There's no other option." The ship sped into the void, leaving the wreckage of the station behind. Ahead of us, the galaxy lay in turmoil, with cores waking in every corner. And at the center of it all was Lyra, the woman who had been both our ally and our greatest mystery. As I looked at her, I couldn't help but wonder what else she was hiding, what other truths lay buried beneath the surface. But one thing was clear: the fate of the galaxy was now tied to her, and to us. And the final battle was only just beginning. I sat in the dimly lit cockpit of our ship, the Starfire, as we sped through the emptiness of space, a tension simmering in the air. Lyra, her brow furrowed in concentration, was hunched over the console, analyzing the device we had salvaged from the now obliterated archive station. The data we recovered was our only chance to understand the cores and their potential to wreak havoc on the galaxy. The ship's engines hummed softly as Ortega sat beside me, his eyes flicking back and forth between Lyra and the starfield beyond. "You think we'll be able to make sense of that thing?" he asked, skepticism lacing his voice. "It's our only shot," I replied, glancing at Lyra. "We don't have much time before the factions figure out what's happening." Lyra looked up from her work, her blue eyes glimmering with determination. "If I can access the core functions, I believe I can decode the data and understand what the Queen is capable of, and what we need to do to stop the cores from waking fully." "Assuming we don't get blown to bits before then?" Ortega added dryly. Ignoring his sarcasm, I focused on Lyra. "What do you need from us?" She hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting to the device, which pulsed faintly with an ethereal glow. I'll need to synchronize the ship's systems with the device. It should give us the computational power to run the algorithms needed for decoding. But there's a risk. What kind of risk? I asked, my gut twisting. The device is ancient. It might respond unpredictably. We could end up awakening something within the Queen, or worse, it could overload. I glanced at Ortega, who looked equally wary. Let's do it, I said. We don't have a choice. As we began the synchronization process, the ship vibrated under the strain, the glow from the device intensifying. Lyra worked with precision, her fingers flying across the controls. The energy in the cockpit shifted, and I could feel the air crackling with tension. Initializing, she said, her voice steady. Brace yourselves. The ship jolted, and a brilliant light filled the cockpit, blinding us momentarily. I shielded my eyes, adrenaline coursing through me. The sound of machinery whirring and beeping surrounded us, the console erupting with data streams. As my vision cleared, I saw Lyra's expression change, shifting from determination to awe. It's working, she exclaimed. I can see the core structures. This is incredible. Before we could process her words, the ship's alarms blared, and a red warning light flashed overhead. Warning, multiple contacts approaching. The ship's AI warned, its voice clipped. Hostile vessels detected. Damn it, Ortega swore, flipping switches on the console. How many? 5, the AI responded. Zypherian mercenaries, based on their signatures. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, I shouted, adrenaline flooding my veins. I grabbed the controls, steering the Starfire into a sharp turn as a barrage of laser fire lit up the space where we had just been. The ship shook violently, and alarms blared louder. Lyra, can you continue the decoding? I yelled over the chaos. I can try, but I need time, she shouted back, her eyes darting between the console and the viewport as another round of fire ricocheted off our shields. Ortega tightened his grip on his weapon, scanning the viewscreen. They're closing in fast. We need to get out of here. Hold on. I pushed the engines to their limits, the ship surging forward as I angled away from the incoming fire. The Zypherians were relentless, their ships sleek and predatory, darting around us with alarming speed. Lyra's hands moved rapidly over the console, her focus unbroken despite the chaos. I'm extracting the first layer of data now, she shouted, her voice fierce. We need to know what we're up against. I flipped a switch, activating our cloaking device as we entered a nearby asteroid field. The ship shuddered as the surrounding rocks passed by in a blur, offering us temporary cover. We'll lose them in here, I said, hoping my words held more truth than doubt. Keep us stable, Ortega called out as he took a position at the weapons console. I'll be ready if they find us. The ship's cloaking technology enveloped us in a shroud of invisibility, but the Zypherians were cunning hunters. They would not give up easily. Lyra, how's that data coming? I asked, glancing back at her. Almost, she was interrupted by a violent shake as a missile struck the hull. Warning lights flashed again, and the ship lurched dangerously. Hold on, I shouted as I swerved to dodge more incoming fire. The asteroid field was our only hope, but it was also a treacherous maze. Got it, Lyra yelled suddenly, and the ship's systems flared with new energy. I've unlocked information about the cores. They're not just weapons, they're also conduits for immense power. Conduits? Ortega echoed, surprise coloring his voice. What kind of power? The kind that can reshape reality itself, Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. If we can harness it, we could end this conflict before it starts, I finished for her, heart racing. But we need to keep it out of the wrong hands. Exactly, she said, determination flashing in her eyes. The Queen's awakening is tied to this energy. If she can channel it, she could unite the factions or destroy them. We had no time to waste. The Zypherian ships were gaining on us, relentless in their pursuit. I spotted an opening between two massive asteroids, a narrow passage that could either save us or seal our fate. Hold tight, I shouted, veering toward the gap. The ship shuddered violently as I maneuvered, scraping against the rock walls. The Zypherians were right on our tail, their weapons blazing. Take the shot, I called to Ortega. On it, he fired back, the ship shaking with each blast. A ship exploded in a burst of flames, but the others pressed forward, undeterred. Go faster, Lyra urged, her fingers dancing across the controls as she attempted to siphon energy from the device. We're pushing the engines to their limits, I gritted my teeth, sweat beading on my forehead. The passage ahead was closing, the asteroids looming like jaws ready to snap shut. Almost there, Lyra called out, and I poured everything I had into the engines. With one final surge, we shot through the gap, narrowly escaping the crushing rock. The Zypherians hesitated, caught in the turbulent wake of our flight. Not bad for a ship that's seen better days, Ortega said, his tone lightening as the immediate danger faded. Let's hope it lasts, I replied, glancing at Lyra, who was intently studying the data now flowing into the ship's systems. We're not out of the woods yet, she said, eyes scanning the readouts. We need to figure out our next move and fast. As we navigated the asteroid field, the shadows of the surrounding rocks loomed like giants. I could feel the weight of the galaxy on my shoulders, the uncertainty of what lay ahead settling in like a thick fog. We need allies, I said, my mind racing. If we're going to face the Zypherians and the cores, we can't do it alone. Lyra nodded, determination etched into her features. I know of a few groups, rebels and defectors from the various factions. They're gathering in the old mining colony on Eloria. It's risky, but they might help us. Eloria, Ortega mused. That place is a hotbed for all kinds of trouble. We'd have to be careful. Careful is what we do best, I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. But we can't hesitate. The cores are waking up, and we need to stay one step ahead. Then let's get moving, Lyra said, her resolve unwavering. We'll decode the rest of the data on the way. The Queen's ascendance is closer than we think, and with it, the fate of the galaxy. With the asteroid field behind us and the vast expanse of space ahead, I knew this was only the beginning. The road would be perilous, filled with danger and uncertainty, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Our journey had just begun, and with each pulse of the ancient device, I felt the weight of destiny pushing us forward into the unknown. The Starfire sped through the void, navigating the edges of the Eloria system, where swirling nebulae painted the darkness with hues of violet and gold. The air crackled with anticipation as Lyra's fingers danced over the console, absorbing the data she had extracted. I could see the tension in her posture. The fate of our mission hinged on her ability to decode the Queen's legacy before our enemies closed in. Eloria is a former mining colony, she said, her voice steady yet urgent. It has fallen into disarray, but it's a hub for those who resist the established factions, if we can rally them. Can you trust these rebels? Ortega interjected, scanning the readings. Word travels fast, and the last thing we need is to walk into a trap. Trust is a luxury we can't afford right now, I replied, my eyes fixed on the navigation screen. We have to take the risk. If they know anything about the cores or the Queen, it could change everything. Then let's hope they're willing to talk, Lyra said, turning her attention back to the console. The ship hummed with energy, a reminder of the ancient power we were entangled with. As we approached Eloria, the remnants of old mining operations became visible, derelict structures jutting from the surface like jagged teeth. The planet had seen better days, and the signs of neglect were evident in the crumbling buildings and the overgrown flora reclaiming the land. I'll initiate a comm link, I said, pulling up the planetary scans. Let's see if we can get a hold of anyone willing to assist. The ship's AI chimed in, its voice echoing through the cockpit, transmitting signal to known rebel frequencies. Fingers crossed, Ortega muttered, gripping his weapon tightly. Moments later, a crackling voice broke through the static. Starfire, this is the Elorian Coalition. Identify yourselves. Lyra, do you want to take this? I asked, glancing at her. "No, I think you should," she replied, her expression calm but resolute. "You're the captain. This is your show." "Fair enough." I cleared my throat. "This is Captain Terk of the Starfire. We're here seeking allies against a common threat. We've encountered a significant danger related to the cores, and we believe your coalition may have valuable information." There was a moment of silence, then the voice responded, skepticism lacing its tone. "You expect us to believe that? You're just another ship trying to survive in these parts." I glanced at Lyra, who nodded subtly, urging me to maintain composure. "We're not here for a fight. We just lost an archive station that held critical information about the cores and the dormant human queen. We need help now." Another pause followed, then the voice replied, "All right, we'll allow you to land, but come unarmed. We're not keen on welcoming strangers with weapons drawn." "Understood," I said, exchanging a glance with Ortega. He hesitated but eventually nodded, lowering his weapon. "Prepare for landing," Lyra instructed, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls as she guided the Starfire toward a landing pad surrounded by crumbling structures. "Stay alert." As the ship touched down, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever awaited us. The door hissed open, revealing a small contingent of rebels, men and women clad in mismatched armor, their expressions a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "Welcome to Aloria," a tall man stepped forward, his gaze assessing us. "I'm Jax, leader of the coalition. You said you have information about the cores?" I stepped out first, followed by Lyra and Ortega. "Yes, we do. But first, we need to discuss the Queen." Jax's eyes narrowed slightly, but he gestured for us to follow. "Let's talk inside. We don't want to attract attention out here." We moved through the dilapidated corridors of the mining colony, the walls echoing with the footsteps of our small group. The atmosphere was thick with tension, remnants of a bygone era hanging in the air. Faded posters adorned the walls, calling for unity and resistance against oppressive forces. Once inside a dimly lit chamber, Jax motioned for us to sit. "You've piqued my interest. Start from the beginning." I glanced at Lyra, who nodded, her determination unyielding. "We discovered a dormant queen, an ancient figure tied to the cores. Her awakening could shift the balance of power across the galaxy." "Go on," Jax urged, leaning forward. "During our exploration, we encountered threats from Zypherian mercenaries who want to control the cores for themselves. We managed to extract data from the archive station before it was destroyed, and we believe that the Queen holds the key to harnessing this power against them." "And what do you propose?" Jax asked, skepticism returning. "We're just a band of rebels. We can't take on a faction like the Zypherians." "Maybe not alone," I replied, "but if we unite the factions against them, we could have a chance. Your coalition could lead the way." Jax regarded us with a mixture of hope and doubt. "It's not that simple. The factions are fractured. There's distrust between us, and many still hold onto old grudges." "Then we'll have to put those aside," Lyra interjected, her voice steady. "The core threat is real, and it won't wait for old animosities to heal. If the cores awaken completely, there won't be a galaxy left to fight for." Silence fell over the room, tension thickening the air as Jax contemplated our words. "You're right, but how can we convince the others?" "I can help with that," Lyra said, leaning forward. "If we can demonstrate the Queen's potential, it might sway the factions to unite. We need to prepare to awaken her." Jax raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "You're suggesting we bring forth a legendary figure to sway these factions? That's a bold plan." "Boldness is all we have," I replied. "If we can gather support, we can confront the Zypherian threat and ensure the Queen's power is used for protection, not destruction." "Very well," Jax said, finally nodding. "I'll call a meeting with our allies. We'll need everyone on board if we're to face this threat. But you need to understand, if we're going to awaken this Queen, there's no turning back. You're putting all our lives at stake." "I understand," I said, the weight of his words settling over me. but we have to act. The longer we wait, the stronger the Zypherian forces will become. After Jax left to gather the coalition leaders, I turned to Lyra. What do you think? Are we really ready for this? I believe we have to be, she replied, her eyes focused. The data we've gathered is critical. If we can unlock the Queen's potential, we might change the tide in our favor. What about the risks? Ortega asked, arms crossed. You said earlier that awakening the Queen could lead to unforeseen consequences. Lyra met his gaze, determination etched on her face. I know the risks, but if we can control her awakening, we could channel her power to protect the galaxy, not destroy it. It's a chance we must take. Before I could respond, Jax returned, flanked by several others rebels with hardened expressions and battle-worn armor. All right, everyone. This is Tarek, Lyra, and Ortega. They've brought important news about the cores and a plan to awaken the Queen. Awaken the Queen? One of the newcomers, a woman with fierce eyes, challenged. And what makes you think we can trust you? We're all on the same side here, I said, trying to convey confidence. The Zypherian threat is real, and we need to unite if we want to survive. Is that enough? She pressed, folding her arms. Look, Lyra interjected, her voice steady. We have data that could change everything. If the cores awaken, we'll all be in danger. But if we can bring the Queen back, we might have a fighting chance. Jax nodded, clearly trying to hold the group together. Let's hear what they have to say. As the rebels gathered, I felt a mix of hope and dread. This was a pivotal moment, one that could determine the fate of not just us, but the entire galaxy. As I glanced at Lyra, I could see the resolve in her eyes. She believed in this plan, and deep down, so did I. We had to awaken the Queen, not just for ourselves, but for all the lives at stake. All right, I said, raising my voice to address the group. Let's discuss how we can make this happen. As they began to strategize, I felt a sense of purpose settle over me. This was the dawn of something new, a chance to harness the legacy of the Queen and unite a fractured galaxy against the growing darkness. The air in the makeshift war room buzzed with energy as we laid out our plan. Maps of the Aloria system adorned the walls, detailing the movements of Zypherian forces and the locations of various factions. Jax stood at the center, rallying the coalition around a singular goal: awaken the Queen and forge an alliance that could confront the encroaching threat. First, we need to secure the ancient temple where the Queen rests, Jax began, his voice steady. It's situated deep in the uncharted jungles of Aloria Prime, protected by ancient technologies. We'll need to split into teams, one to gather supplies, and another to scout the area for Zypherian patrols. Lyra, her eyes alight with determination, stepped forward. We should send a small team to the temple to assess the risks before we make any large-scale movements. I can go with Tarek and Ortega. Agreed, Jax said, nodding. That way, we can minimize exposure while we gather intel. The tension in the room was palpable as the rebels exchanged glances, weighing their trust in us. It was a risk, but it was one we had to take. The stakes were too high to falter now. Then it's settled, I declared, taking a deep breath. We'll head out at first light. While we're gone, the rest of you can fortify this position and prepare the coalition for our return. With the plan in place, I could feel a renewed sense of purpose. As the coalition leaders dispersed, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. Lyra, I said, drawing her aside. Are you ready for this? Awakening the Queen will change everything. We have no idea how she'll react. I know, she replied, her gaze steady. But if we can channel her power, we might turn the tide in our favor. We have to believe we can control it. Control is the key word here, Ortega added, joining us. If she senses even a hint of weakness, who knows what she'll do? We'll be ready, I assured them. We have to trust ourselves and each other. The night passed with little rest. As dawn broke over Aloria Prime, I gathered our gear, preparing for the journey ahead. Lyra's face was light by the early light, her expression a mix of resolve and apprehension. "Ready?" I asked, slinging my pack over my shoulder. "Ready," she replied, her voice steady. Ortega joined us, his demeanor surprisingly calm for the storm that lay ahead. "Let's get this done." With a final nod to Jax and the coalition, we set out, the path ahead shrouded in the thick, vibrant foliage of the jungle. The sounds of Aloria's wildlife surrounded us, a cacophony of life that stood in stark contrast to the turmoil of our mission. As we navigated the dense underbrush, Lyra led the way, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "The temple should be just beyond this clearing," she said, her voice carrying a hint of excitement. "Keep your weapons ready," I cautioned, my senses heightened. We don't know if the Zypherians have already taken notice of our movements. The clearing opened before us, revealing the majestic ruins of the ancient temple, its stone facade intertwined with vines and foliage. The architecture was awe-inspiring, a testament to a civilization long past. It felt sacred, a place where history intertwined with the future. "Look at this place," Ortega breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful." "It's also a target," I reminded him. "Let's find a way in and assess any threats before we proceed." As we approached the entrance, the atmosphere grew heavy with energy. The temple pulsed with a faint glow, a resonance that felt both welcoming and ominous. "Something's here," Lyra said, halting in her tracks. "I can feel it." "Let's check the perimeter first," I suggested, scanning the area for any signs of danger. "We can't afford to be caught off guard." We split up, moving quietly through the shadows, staying alert for any sign of the Zypherian presence. As I rounded a corner, I spotted movement, 2 Zypherian soldiers patrolling the outer area. "Ortega, Lyra," I whispered urgently, signaling them to join me. "We've got company." They nodded, and together we devised a plan to take them out silently. With a nod, we moved in unison, Lyra incapacitating one with a swift strike, while Ortega and I subdued the other. "Let's get their gear," I said, checking the fallen soldiers for anything useful. I secured a Zypherian comm device and a few energy packs. "Good work," Lyra said, her voice steady. "Now let's see what's inside." We returned to the entrance, the ancient stone doors looming before us. With a push, the doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit chamber adorned with intricate carvings and murals depicting the Queen in all her glory. "This is it," Lyra breathed, stepping inside. "The heart of the temple." As we ventured deeper, the energy pulsed stronger, almost like a heartbeat. The walls shimmered with energy, and at the center of the chamber lay the Queen's resting place, an ornate sarcophagus encased in a translucent energy field. "We found her," I said, my heart racing. "Can you feel that?" Ortega asked, awed by the scene. "It's incredible." Lyra stepped closer, eyes wide with reverence. "This is where it all began. If we can access her essence, it might awaken her." As I approached the sarcophagus, a wave of energy washed over me. "We need to disrupt the field," I said, searching for a way to deactivate the barrier. "But how?" "Let me try," Lyra suggested, reaching out to the energy. "I have some knowledge of ancient technologies. If I can channel my energy through it, maybe." "Be careful," I warned, concern creeping into my voice. "I will," she promised, determination shining in her eyes. As she focused her energy on the barrier, the room filled with an ethereal light. The energy field flickered, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. It was a delicate balance, one that could either awaken the Queen or unleash untold chaos. Suddenly, a roar echoed from outside, the unmistakable sound of a Zypherian patrol advancing. "They've found us," Ortega shouted, drawing his weapon. "We need to hurry." "Almost there," Lyra grunted, straining against the energy field as it flickered violently. "Just a little longer." I turned to Ortega. "We'll cover her. Keep them away from the entrance." With a nod, we positioned ourselves at the door, weapons drawn. As the first Zypherian soldier burst into the chamber, I fired, the blast hitting him squarely in the chest. He crumpled, but more followed, their faces twisted in fury. "Fall back," I shouted, urging Ortega to retreat closer to Lyra. We can't let them reach her. Lyra gritted her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead. I need just a moment longer. We don't have a moment, I yelled, firing again as more soldiers flooded in. The room felt like it was closing in around us, and I knew we had to hold the line. As we fought, I could see the energy barrier wavering. Lyra, we need to finish this. Just a little more, she gasped, her hands trembling as she poured every ounce of energy she had into the field. With a final surge, the energy barrier exploded outward, casting a brilliant light across the chamber. I shielded my eyes, the radiance engulfing the entire room. In that moment, everything froze. Time itself held its breath. Then, as if awoken from a long slumber, the sarcophagus opened. A figure emerged, glowing with ancient power. The queen stood before us, ethereal and magnificent, her eyes a piercing blue that seemed to see through everything. "Who dares disturb my rest?" her voice echoed, both soothing and commanding, reverberating through the chamber. "We come in need of your strength," I shouted, stepping forward despite the chaos surrounding us. "The Zypherian forces threaten our very existence." She regarded me, and I felt her presence envelop me like a warm embrace. "You awaken me from slumber to fight the darkness?" Her gaze shifted to the approaching soldiers. "Then let us show them the power of humanity." In that moment, the chamber erupted with energy, the queen's presence igniting a fire within me. I could feel the tide turning as the Zypherian soldiers hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. "Together," I shouted to Ortega and Lyra, "fight with her." As the battle raged, I could see the power of the queen manifesting around us, a radiant shield that deflected blasts and enhanced our strength. We were no longer just fighting for survival. We were rallying behind a force that could reshape the galaxy. With the queen at our side, we pushed back the Zypherian forces, our unity an unstoppable force. I felt the thrill of battle coursing through me, igniting every fiber of my being. We were fighting for something greater, something that transcended mere survival. The tide of the battle shifted, our determination fueling the queen's power. With every strike, we reclaimed our destiny. Together, we would forge a new alliance, one that would protect our future. As the last Zypherian soldier fell, I looked to the queen, gratitude filling my heart. "Thank you for awakening. We will protect the galaxy together." She smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "The time of the queen has come. Let us unite our strength and reclaim what is rightfully ours." The aftermath of the battle left the ancient temple in a surreal silence. The air still crackled with energy, the remnants of the queen's awakening shimmering in the light. As I stood amidst the fallen Zypherian soldiers, the reality of our victory sank in. "We did it," Ortega said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." Lyra looked toward the queen, her expression a mix of awe and respect. "What now? We can't just leave the temple unguarded." The queen surveyed the battlefield, her eyes glowing with an ancient wisdom. "We must fortify this place. It is no longer merely a temple. It is a beacon of hope. The Zypherians will not relent easily." "Then we'll need to gather our forces," I replied, adrenaline still coursing through me. "We should establish a defensive perimeter and rally the coalition to protect this site. This will be our stronghold." "Agreed," the queen said, her voice resonating with authority. "But first, you must understand the power that lies within these walls." She stepped forward, gesturing for us to follow her deeper into the temple. The walls shimmered with intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with life, depicting battles and alliances forged long ago. As we moved, the carvings glowed brighter, light the path ahead. "Centuries ago, my ancestors created this sanctuary to preserve the essence of humanity," the queen explained. "Within it lies the power to unite worlds, to awaken strength in those who dare to dream." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked, her curiosity piqued. "The energies of this place can amplify the inherent potential within each being," the queen replied. "But it requires a willing heart and a courageous spirit." "Then we should begin the awakening," I said, determination flooding my veins. "We need to empower our allies." The queen nodded, her expression resolute. "Gather your coalition. We will infuse them with the essence of this sanctuary. But be warned, the power is not to be wielded lightly. It will test each individual in ways they cannot anticipate." As we returned to the main chamber, I could see the coalition gathering outside, their expressions a mix of wonder and trepidation. Jack stood at the forefront, his brow furrowed in concern. "What happened?" he asked, his eyes darting to the fallen Zypherian soldiers. "Is it over?" "For now," I said, gesturing toward the Queen. "This is our ally. She has awakened to aid us in the fight against the Zypherians." Jax's eyes widened in disbelief, but he quickly regained his composure. "Then we need to strategize. We can't afford to lose this momentum." The Queen raised her hand, silencing the crowd. "I will not only fight alongside you, I will share the power of this sanctuary with those who are willing. But it will require a sacrifice of fear and doubt. Only those brave enough to face themselves may wield it." As murmurs rippled through the crowd, I could see the weight of her words settling in. It was one thing to face a physical enemy. It was another to confront the internal battles that raged within. "We'll stand by you," I said, stepping forward. "Whoever is willing to embrace this challenge will do so together." Jax nodded, rallying the coalition. "We're all in this, whatever it takes." The Queen gestured for us to follow her into the heart of the sanctuary. "Then let us begin." The chamber filled with a vibrant energy as we arranged ourselves in a circle, the Queen at the center. "Focus your thoughts," she instructed. "Let go of your fears. Embrace the power that resides within you." As the coalition members closed their eyes, I felt the air thrum with potential. It was as if the very walls of the temple were alive, eager to connect with our spirits. "Now," the Queen commanded, "let the essence of the sanctuary flow through you." A wave of warmth enveloped us, and I felt a surge of energy coursing through my veins. It was intoxicating, a realization that we were more than mere fighters. We were part of something greater. "Feel the strength of your resolve," the Queen continued. "Let it manifest. Let it transform your doubts into clarity." One by one, I could sense the coalition members awakening, their spirits igniting with newfound power. The temple resonated with their determination, and I felt the bond among us strengthening. But as the energy peaked, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath us. I opened my eyes, alarm flooding my senses. "What was that?" Ortega shouted, looking around. The Queen's expression hardened. "The Zypherians have regrouped. They sense the awakening." "Then we need to act fast," I said, my pulse racing. "We can't let them interrupt this process." The ground trembled again, and the temple's protective barriers flickered ominously. "We must finish what we started," the Queen urged. "If we complete the awakening, we will gain the strength to repel them." "Let's move," Jax shouted, rallying the coalition. "Stay close. Protect the Queen." We formed a defensive perimeter around the Queen as she focused her energy, channeling it into a protective barrier. The temple resonated with her power, and I felt the surge of energy intensifying. The doors burst open, and Zypherian soldiers flooded in, their faces a mask of rage. "Stop them!" one of the officers roared, raising his weapon. We met them head-on, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The Queen's energy enveloped us, amplifying our strength as we fought with renewed vigor. "Push forward," I shouted, striking down a soldier. "We can't let them breach the inner sanctum." The chaos of battle engulfed us, but amidst the clash of weapons and the roar of energy, I could see the determination in my allies' eyes. They were fighting not just for survival, but for a future united under the Queen's leadership. With every strike, I could feel the sanctuary's essence flowing through me, empowering my blows, guiding my movements. I wasn't alone. We were all part of something greater. As the last Zypherian soldier fell, the chamber fell silent, but the tension remained palpable. I turned to the Queen, breathless. "We did it, but they will keep coming. We need to fortify our defenses and prepare for their next assault." She nodded, her expression one of fierce resolve. "We will make this temple a bastion of hope. I will channel the energies to strengthen our defenses. But we must also gather intelligence on their movements. We need to know when and where they will strike next. Lyra stepped forward, her determination evident. I can scout the surrounding areas and gather information on their forces. We can use the natural terrain to our advantage. Excellent, the Queen replied, her tone appreciative. We need to be strategic. It is time to harness our power and use it wisely. As the coalition rallied around the Queen, I felt the weight of our journey ahead. We were no longer mere rebels. We were united by a purpose greater than ourselves. The Queen's awakening had transformed us, but it was only the beginning. Our path forward was fraught with danger, but together we would face it. We would forge alliances, strengthen our resolve, and reclaim our place in the galaxy. We'll make our stand here, I said, addressing the coalition. Together, we will protect this sanctuary and awaken the strength within all of us. A chorus of agreement rose from the group, the energy in the air charged with determination. I could feel the heartbeat of the temple resonating with our resolve, a testament to the power of unity. The days that followed the battle felt like a whirlwind. We fortified the temple and established a network of scouts to monitor Zypherian movements. With each passing hour, the Queen's presence transformed the sanctuary into a beacon of hope. Under her guidance, we harnessed the energy of the temple, growing stronger and more unified with every training session. But the tension in the air was palpable. The Zypherians were relentless, their anger fueling their assaults. They had tasted defeat, and they were eager for vengeance. One evening, while we gathered around a holographic map in the main chamber, Jax pointed to a series of red dots clustered on the display. They're converging here, he said, his brow furrowing in concern. It looks like they're planning a full-scale attack on the temple. Ortega crossed his arms, his jaw clenched. We need to prepare our defenses. If they breach our walls, we'll be overwhelmed. The Queen, standing at the center of our gathering, looked at the map with a steely determination. We will not let them take this sanctuary. It has become a symbol of our resilience. We will fight with everything we have. Lyra, her eyes bright with resolve, spoke up. We should use the terrain to our advantage. There are natural choke points leading up to the temple that we can exploit. If we position our forces strategically, we can funnel them into a smaller area. Good thinking, I said, nodding in agreement. We can set traps and ambushes to wear them down before they reach our walls. The coalition members murmured in agreement, a shared sense of purpose igniting the air. We began drafting plans, arranging our forces in defensive positions while simultaneously preparing for the counterattack. As night fell, we set up watchtowers and fortified our defenses, the energy of the sanctuary thrumming beneath our feet. I took a moment to step outside, the stars twinkling above like distant guardians watching over us. The Queen emerged beside me, her presence calming. You carry a heavy burden, human. It's not just my burden, I replied, glancing at her. We're all in this together. I can't help but worry about what happens if we fail. We will not fail, she said firmly. The awakening of humanity and the rise of the Queen is a force of nature. We are destined to reclaim what is ours. Her words filled me with a sense of purpose. I could see the truth in them. Together, we had already overcome so much. The strength of our bond was something the Zypherians could not comprehend. The night wore on, and we prepared for the inevitable confrontation. As dawn broke, the horizon turned a brilliant shade of orange, light the temple in a golden hue. It felt like a promise of victory. When the first Zypherian forces approached, the tension in the air thickened. We held our breath, hearts pounding as they neared. The Queen stood at the forefront, radiating an energy that filled us all with courage. Remember, she said, her voice ringing with authority. Fight not just for yourselves, but for the future we are creating together. As the Zypherians reached the outer perimeter, I signaled the coalition to take their positions. Hold the line, I shouted, adrenaline surging as the first wave of enemies crashed against our defenses. The battle erupted in chaos. Energy beams lit up the sky, and the sound of clashing weapons echoed through the valley. I fought alongside my allies, each blow fueled by the determination to protect our sanctuary. The Zypherians were fierce, but we were united. I could feel the Queen's energy guiding me, pushing me to fight harder. With every fallen enemy, I could sense the tide turning. Just when it seemed like we were gaining ground, a massive Zypherian warship descended from the sky, blocking out the sun. A sense of dread washed over me as it unleashed a wave of energy that knocked several of our coalition members off their feet. "We need to take that ship down," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the din of battle. "Lyra, Ortega, with me." We rushed toward the ship, dodging incoming fire. The Queen's voice rang in my ears, urging us to harness the sanctuary's energy. I felt the power coursing through me, amplifying my strength and resolve. As we reached the base of the ship, I looked up at the towering structure. "We need to breach the hull. Lyra, can you get us in?" "Leave it to me," she shouted, pulling out a small device that glowed with an iridescent light. "This should do the trick." With a burst of energy, she activated the device, sending a wave of vibrations rippling through the ground. The ship's hull responded, a section of it crumbling away to reveal an opening. "Now," I yelled, charging inside with Ortega and Lyra at my side. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the faint hum of machinery. We moved swiftly through the corridors, our hearts racing as we navigated the ship's labyrinthine structure. "Where do we go?" Ortega asked, glancing around nervously. "Down," I replied, recalling the schematics I'd seen during our briefings. "We need to reach the main control room. That's where we can disable their systems." As we made our way deeper into the ship, we encountered Zypherian soldiers, their faces twisted in rage as they spotted us. A fierce battle ensued, our training and the Queen's energy guiding us through the chaos. With every victory, I felt our collective strength surging. The Queen's awakening had ignited something deep within us, and we fought not just for ourselves, but for a future where humanity could thrive. Finally, we reached the control room, a vast chamber filled with screens displaying the chaos of the battle outside. "There," I pointed to the central console, glowing ominously. Lyra raced forward, her fingers flying over the controls. "I can shut down their systems. Cover me." As Ortega and I fended off incoming Zypherian reinforcements, I could feel the pressure mounting. The sounds of battle echoed around us, but I focused on protecting Lyra as she worked. "Almost there," she shouted, determination etched on her face. "Just a little longer." With a final push, she slammed her palm against the console, and a wave of energy rippled through the ship. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered ominously. "It's done! Their systems are shutting down," she exclaimed, a triumphant smile breaking across her face. As the ship shuddered beneath us, I turned to Ortega. "We need to get out, now." We raced back through the ship, the walls vibrating with the energy of our victory. Outside, I could see the battle shifting as our coalition pressed forward, the Queen's energy empowering them against the dwindling Zypherian forces. Just as we emerged from the ship, it erupted in a brilliant explosion, sending shockwaves through the area. I fell to my knees, the force of the blast knocking me off balance. When I looked up, I saw the Zypherian ranks faltering. The tide of battle had shifted in our favor, the Queen's energy and our newfound strength inspiring courage in our allies. With renewed vigor, we pushed forward, fighting side by side. The Zypherian forces were overwhelmed, and one by one, they began to retreat, their once mighty ranks crumbling before us. The Queen stood atop the temple, radiating a power that drew us all in. "This is our moment. We will reclaim our place in the galaxy." As the last of the Zypherian soldiers fled, a cheer erupted from our coalition. We had done it. Against all odds, we had reclaimed the sanctuary. Breathless and covered in the remnants of battle, I turned to the Queen, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you for awakening. Together, we've changed the course of our future." She smiled, the glimmer of ancient wisdom in her eyes. "The time of the Queen has come, and with it, the awakening of humanity. This is just the beginning. As we stood together, united by our shared victory, I could feel the weight of what we had accomplished. The sanctuary was more than just a stronghold. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that together, we could overcome any obstacle. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the temple, I knew that the Queen's legacy would endure. The galaxy had felt our strength, and we were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together.